Good morning. Welcome to our session this morning, The Perilous Experience of Women of Color in Higher Education, Case Studies of two Chicanx Latinx professors. This session is for the International Council of Professors of Educational Leadership, August 2020. I'm Noni Mendoza Reis, Professor Emerita, Educational Leadership, San Jose State University, and my colleague is Dr. Rosalinda Quintanar Sarayana, also Professor Emerita, Teacher Education, San Jose State University. Welcome to our session. This article builds upon previous research of women of color in academia, and we present the lived experience of two Chicanx Latinx professors. We present the counter stories as case studies. Case study number 1 is Community Cultural Wealth of a Scholar from a Farmworker Background in Academia. And case study 2 is Serving Students in the Community versus Academic Scholarship, a Case of Cultural Taxation. As an introduction to this particular article, a colleague and I wrote 10 years ago an article, Why Are There So Few of Us? Counter Stories from Women of Color in Faculty Governance Roles. We were concerned about the low number of women of color in faculty positions, but most importantly, as well in faculty governance roles. The findings of that study were consistent with the literature framework that we were using, the notion of overcompetence for faculty of color to gain confidence, competence, and credibility. At that time, we used the use of counter storytelling as a methodological and pedagogical tool as proposed by critical race theory, Daniel Solorzano, Delgado Bernal, and Solorzano and Yoso. These are the stories that often go unrecognized and unacknowledged. As we go forth to this study, we also are using critical race theory. Also, there continues to be a persistent imbalance of women of color in faculty roles. Not unlike 10 years ago, full professors comprise a very few percentage in terms of Hispanic females, less than 1%. For Hispanic females, American Indian, Alaska Native individuals, and individuals of 2 or more races. 3% of Asian Pacific Islander and Black females comprise full tenure professors percentage. So I'm going to begin with the first case. This is my personal narrative. I come from a family of farm workers, and this has grounded my work in education. I was in K-12 before I came to higher ed. And throughout both those parts of my life, my understanding about the education of students with families situated in poverty and communities of color is deeply rooted in firsthand experiences. I use critical race theory because it shifts the research lens away from a deficit view of communities. Solorzano proposed 5 tenets of critical race theory in 1998. And I'm using commitment to social justice and the centrality of experiential knowledge to analyze this case. Yoso identified 6 forms of capital that create a community's cultural wealth in capital. And for this study, I'm using aspirational, familial, social, navigational, and resistant. I'm going to speak a little bit about the centrality of experiential knowledge as a professor. For me, as a first-generation scholar, I was able to mentor students with similar class backgrounds who didn't always know how to navigate the university system. Mentoring often resulted in building their social capital about ways to be successful in the university, and sometimes discussing the issue of internalized oppression that I had experienced and that I saw some of my students experience as well. The second part was the commitment to social justice. And as I said earlier, farm worker background shaped my understanding. And because in addition to a formal education, this lived experience provided practical examples about ways my students could apply the theories they were learning. And one of the ways was supporting the development of a critical consciousness that's so necessary in social justice teaching. Holding this commitment to social justice leadership at the center rather than periphery of their leadership was my intent as a professor of these students. Positionality was important for me and also for them. For me as a professor, I came to understand and appreciate that there's a difference between scholars who have a lived experience with poverty and those who visited poverty through research. And that difference is that when one has experienced poverty, the contributions are centered in firsthand and deep experiences. Our positionality as scholars from the poverty class provides a lens that is unique. We've experienced firsthand many of the inequities in our school system, as have many of our students of color. So that is the parts of what I used for centrality of experiential knowledge for this particular study. In terms of community cultural wealth, and now moving from a professor, but also the notion of promotion and tenure, I used aspirational and navigational capital to discuss this. In terms of navigational, I wanted to make sure that I received promotion and tenure. And these are some of the strategies that worked. One of the strategies was to be collaborative. I formed writing collaboratives with colleagues in similar situations. Mentored by our department chair, I participated with 2 other colleagues where we developed a small research and writing agenda. We brainstormed possible research that we could conduct within our sphere of influence, and we co-authored 3 journal articles where we rotated first author order. Our aspiration, as I said earlier, was to be successful, and we supported each other through the RTP process. So it was situations like these that supported me to navigate the RTP process and achieve full professor status in a timely manner. As I became a senior faculty, along with other mentors, other colleagues, we used mentoring to mentor our other colleagues. We would have informal discussions and discuss ways that we could resist against unexamined assumptions that were held about our colleagues of color. And we found ways to advocate. For example, we served on additional committees in order to defend their epistemologies so they could also be on the list to receive research grants. Another strategy was that any of our colleagues of color who authored articles, we assigned those in courses so that our students would be exposed not only to critical literature, but more importantly, to literature by scholars of color. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague who will present case 2.